Hello! In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can take your 18-inch Jack Dempsey needle art quilt block and your stripping material, sew them together in order to create a beautiful quilt top. Let's go ahead and get started. Before we start sewing or stripping to our quilt blocks, there's a little bit of prep work we need to do. So we have strips B, and they're not quite long enough in order to fit in the size of our quilt. So what we're going to do is you're going to take all your B strips, you're going to pair them off. So you're going to put two B strips together and so on. Then you're going to take each pair, you're going to place them on top of each other, right side to right side. Now I'm using a solid color, so it's a little hard to tell the right side from the wrong side. It's definitely easier if you're using a print. But you just lay them on top of each other, matching the ends here, because we're going to sew whatever your seam allowance is, so in my case 3/8 of an inch, down here in the end, and then that's going to create one big long strip for B. So we're going to do this for B, and also you're going to repeat the process for C and D strips. If you find it easier, definitely use a fabric marker or pencil in order to mark where your seam line is. That way you can use it as a guideline. Now I'm just doing a regular straight stitch. Don't forget to back stitch because we don't want our stitches to come out. And I'm just doing a regular length. Once I get to the end, I'm going to do another back stitch. Whenever you sew any sort of seam, it's always a good idea to then press your seam because your quilt will end up looking neater in the end. Some people like to have their seam closed and pressed to one side. I actually like to have my seam pressed open. It's whatever your preference is. Now if you have a seam attached to one of your embroidered quilt blocks, it's a good idea then to use a cool iron to press those seams. A hot iron could then set the ink, making it difficult to remove our ink lines in the end. To help with the assembly, I'm going to be using this diagram that's available on the website. For my example, I'm going to be focusing on the twin, but the concepts will apply no matter which size you do. This diagram represents what the completed quilt top is going to look like. You'll see we have numbers and we have letters. Each number represents an individual embroidered quilt block. The letters represent individual strips, and we're actually going to be sewing them on in the order of the alphabet. So first we're going to sew on A, then B, then C, and then D. So it's going to help keep us organized so we know which order we need to sew everything on. The first step we're going to do is you're going to grab all your quilt blocks and then all your strips A. We're going to sew 1 to strip A, then 2 get sewn to the bottom of A, and then you're going to sew on another strip A, and so on. So in my example, I'm going to end up with 3 columns, and each column is going to have 5 of my embroidered quilt blocks with A strips. Now you'll notice there's no A strip at the top and there's no A strip that's going to be at the bottom of your column. Go ahead and grab your blocks and your A strips because we're going to start sewing our pieces together. This is placed right side up. I'm going to take one strip of A and I'm going to place it at the bottom. So it's right side to right side. You're going to make sure that your raw edges match. And I like to use straight pins in order to hold everything. When pinning, what I like to do is pin the outside, then the middle, and then just ease everything in between. That way we're going to make sure that everything fits. I also like to make sure that I place my pins so that they're going perpendicular to the edge. That'll make it a lot easier to remove as we're sewing it. Then you're going to take it to your machine and sew your 3/8 seam allowance, and don't forget to back stitch on both ends. I went ahead, pressed my seam allowance. Don't forget we're using a cool iron. Then I'm grabbing another block. So we have block 1, strip A, block 2. I'm following my diagram. You're going to take the block 2 and place it underneath strip A, and always check to make sure that you're placing your blocks with the same orientation because we want to make sure that we're not actually going to sew one upside down. So once this is ready to go, you're going to take this edge and you're going to match it up with this raw edge. So I'm going to flip it over, pin the raw edges, sew my 3/8 inch seam allowance. Once I have that, you can go ahead, press it open. And then on the bottom of this one, I'm going to grab another strip A. place it so they're right side to right side, matching up the raw edges. You're going to pin, sew your 3/8 seam allowance, press it, and then go ahead and grab another block. Again, you're just following the diagram, so you have the same number of blocks and strips as they do for each column. After all your A stripping is sewn onto your blocks and you have all your columns, we can then move on to the B stripping. So that's the next part, and this stripping is going to be sewn in between each of your columns. So I'm going to take my first column, and here I have one B strip. I'm going to lay it along this edge, right side to right side, and I'm going to make sure that it matches up here at the top. You're going to pin, and again, I like to pin on the outside, pin in the middle, and then work my way in between. You're going to sew your 3/8 seam allowance and then press with a cool iron. I'm going to bring my next column to be sewn with the other side of stripping B. But the thing is, I need to make sure that each row is going to be lined up. So my trick is, after I sew this strip to my first column, I'm going to get a straight ruler, line it up with the edge of the seam line down here at the bottom, and then use a fabric marker, which you can see I've already done here, to extend that line. And I also did the same thing down here. So this edge is going to line up with this raw edge, and this kind of gives me something to line up here. So I can match this line with this seam line and this line with this seam line. So I'm going to go ahead, flip this over so these two raw edges come together. And what I like to do is I'll pin the top and the bottom first, and then the next section I'll pin is going to be this seam line with this line here, and the same thing wherever I have a line. That way I can make sure those are definitely going to line up, and then I just pin everything in between in order to ease it together. Once that's done, go ahead, sew your 3/8 seam allowance. You're going to press this open, and then go ahead and continue on sewing your B strips. Stripping C comes after stripping B. So this is going to be a strip that goes on the edge of your first column and then your last column. So the left side and the right side. You're going to be doing the same thing we did before. You're going to take each strip, flip it over so your raw edges are meeting, and you're going to make sure that everything lines up. Go ahead, pin it, sew your 3/8 seam allowance, and then press it open. So after I finish this side, I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. The last stripping that we need to sew on is going to be D. So this strip is going to be sewn at the top and bottom of our quilt top. So we're just doing the same thing we've done before, flipping it over right side to right side, line up the raw edges, pin and sew your 3/8 seam allowance, and then press your seams. Let's go ahead and look at a finished quilt so you can have an idea on what it's going to look like once you have all your stripping and quilt blocks sewn together and you're able to create this beautiful design. Please make sure to check out other tutorials on quilt assembly from Jack Dempsey Needle Art.